For my anniversary, my family took me to a cheap diner and gave me a card that said, "Maybe next year you'll do something worth celebrating." They all laughed, even my dad. I just smiled, took a photo, and left without a word. 5 days later, they were panicking in the group chat. I, 34M, never thought my own family would be the ones to break me, but here we are. 5 days ago was my 10th wedding anniversary. 10 years of marriage to Sarah, 10 years of building what I thought was a solid life together. I'd been planning something special for weeks. Nothing extravagant, just a nice dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. I'd even managed to get reservations at the place that's usually booked months in advance. But Sarah had other plans. She insisted we celebrate with her family instead. Her parents, her 2 sisters, and even my own father, who somehow always ended up siding with her family over his own son. I should have seen the red flags then, but I was still trying to be the good husband, the accommodating son-in-law. They picked the location, a rundown diner on the outskirts of town that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The kind of place where the coffee tastes like it's been sitting on the burner for hours and the vinyl booths are held together with duct tape. I kept telling myself it was about the company, not the venue. How wrong I was. We squeezed into a corner booth that was too small for 7 adults. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an unflattering glow on everyone's faces. Sarah's mother immediately started complaining about the menu prices. Apparently, even this dump was too expensive for their taste. Her father kept making jokes about how the health inspector probably hadn't visited this place in years. I tried to make conversation, asking about everyone's week, their jobs, anything to fill the awkward silence. But every attempt was met with half-hearted responses or complete indifference. Sarah was busy scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing her sisters something that would make them giggle. My father sat there looking uncomfortable but saying nothing, as usual. The food arrived after what felt like an eternity. My burger was overcooked and dry, the fries were cold, and the whole meal tasted like disappointment. But I ate it anyway, trying to salvage what was left of the evening. I kept thinking about the nice restaurant reservation I'd canceled for this. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sarah's younger sister reached into her purse and pulled out a card. She slid it across the table to me with a smirk that should have been my final warning. The envelope was cheap, the kind you buy in bulk at the dollar store. My name was scrawled across the front in Sarah's handwriting. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe a heartfelt message or at least something acknowledging our anniversary. Instead, I found a generic congratulations card, the kind you'd give someone for graduating kindergarten. But it was what someone had written inside that made my blood run cold. In Sarah's unmistakable handwriting were the words, "Maybe next year you'll do something worth celebrating." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Sarah's father started chuckling. Her mother joined in with a high-pitched laugh that sounded more like a cackle. The sisters were practically in tears from laughing so hard. Even my own father, my own flesh and blood, was shaking his head and smiling like this was the funniest thing he'd ever witnessed. They were all looking at me, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I'd laugh along with their cruel joke or if I'd break down right there in that pathetic diner. Sarah finally looked up from her phone, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before. It wasn't love or even indifference, it was contempt. She told me it was just a joke, that I needed to lighten up. Her sister chimed in, saying I was being too sensitive. Her mother added that maybe if I had a better sense of humor, people would want to celebrate me more. The laughter continued, getting louder and more vicious with each passing second. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, feeling something inside me fundamentally shift. This wasn't just about a bad anniversary dinner or even a cruel joke. This was about years of small slights, dismissive comments, and being treated like I was lucky to be included in their lives rather than being valued as an equal member of the family. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Sarah's family made snide remarks about my job, my hobbies, my opinions. I remembered the Christmas when they'd given everyone else thoughtful gifts, but handed me a gas station gift card they'd clearly picked up on the way over. I recalled the countless family gatherings where I'd been ignored or talked over, where my contributions to conversations were dismissed or forgotten. But this was different. This was deliberate humiliation, orchestrated and executed with precision. They'd planned this moment, probably discussed it beforehand, maybe even rehearsed their reactions. The thought of them sitting around plotting how to embarrass me on my anniversary made my stomach turn. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the card. The laughter died down as they watched me, probably thinking I was going to post it on social media or something equally harmless. Sarah asked what I was doing, but I didn't answer. I just slipped the card into my jacket pocket, stood up from the booth, and walked out of that diner without saying a word. I could hear them calling after me, but their voices sounded distant and unimportant. Sarah followed me to the parking lot, demanding to know where I was going. She said I was overreacting, that it was supposed to be funny. I got in my car and drove home in complete silence, leaving her to figure out her own way back. The next few days were a blur of cold shoulders and passive-aggressive comments. Sarah acted like I was the one who'd ruined our anniversary. She told her family I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I couldn't take a simple joke. The group chat they all shared, the one I'd been removed from months ago without explanation, was probably buzzing with their version of events. But I wasn't sitting idle. I was planning. You see, what my dear family didn't know was that I'd been documenting things for a while. Not because I was planning revenge, I'm not that calculating, but because I'd started to question my own sanity. When you're constantly told you're overreacting or being too sensitive, you start to wonder if maybe you really are the problem. So I'd been keeping records. Screenshots of text messages where Sarah's family mocked me behind my back. Photos of family gatherings where I was deliberately excluded from group pictures. Voice recordings of conversations where they discussed my shortcomings like I wasn't even in the room. I had documentation of the time Sarah's father had borrowed $5,000 from me for his business venture, and then conveniently forgot about it when I brought it up months later. I had proof of the family vacation they'd planned and paid for without including me, then acted surprised when I found out about it through social media. Most importantly, I had evidence of Sarah's affair. I'd suspected something was wrong for months. The late nights at work that didn't match her schedule, the new clothes and perfume, the way she'd started password protecting her phone and laptop, the sudden interest in going out with friends I'd never met. I'd hired a private investigator 3 weeks before our anniversary. Not because I wanted to catch her cheating, but because I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if my instincts were right. The photos he'd provided were crystal clear. Sarah entering a hotel with her coworker, the same coworker she'd claimed was just a friend when I'd asked about him months earlier. The investigator had been thorough. He'd documented multiple meetings over the past 6 months. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even photos of them together at places Sarah had told me she was going alone or with her sisters. It was a comprehensive record of betrayal that went far beyond just physical infidelity. But I hadn't planned to use any of this information. I'd been hoping we could work things out, maybe go to counseling, find a way to rebuild what we'd lost. The anniversary dinner was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to reconnect and remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. Instead, it became the final straw. On the 5th day after the diner incident, I made my move. I'd spent those days in careful preparation, consulting with a lawyer, organizing my finances, and making sure every detail was perfect. I wasn't going to be cruel or vindictive. I was going to be strategic. I started by posting the photo of the anniversary card on my social media accounts. Not with a long, emotional rant, but with a simple caption, 10 years of marriage celebrated at a diner with this thoughtful card from my loving family. Feeling blessed. The responses started immediately. Friends and colleagues who'd always thought Sarah and I had the perfect marriage began asking questions. My coworkers, who'd met Sarah at company events and witnessed her dismissive behavior firsthand, started sharing their own observations in the comments. But the real impact came when I tagged everyone who'd been at that dinner. Sarah's family, who prided themselves on their social media presence and carefully curated image of family harmony, suddenly found themselves having to explain why they'd thought this was appropriate. Sarah called me within an hour, demanding I take the post down. She said I was embarrassing her family, that people were getting the wrong idea. I told her that people were getting exactly the right idea. They were seeing who her family really was. Then I dropped the second bomb. I created a group chat and added everyone from the anniversary dinner, plus a few key family members who hadn't been there. I shared the private investigator's report, complete with photos, dates, and locations. I didn't add any commentary or emotional appeals. I just let the evidence speak for itself. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the chaos began. Sarah's phone started ringing immediately. Her sisters were calling, her parents were texting, even my father was trying to reach me. but I turned off my phone and gone to stay at a hotel for the night. I wanted them to sit with the information, to really process what they'd been celebrating while my marriage was falling apart behind the scenes. The group chat exploded with messages. Sarah's family went into full damage control mode, trying to minimize the affair and somehow make it my fault. They claimed I'd been neglectful, that I'd driven Sarah to seek comfort elsewhere. Her mother even suggested that maybe if I'd been a better husband, Sarah wouldn't have needed to look for affection outside our marriage. But the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss. The investigator had done his job well, and the timeline was clear. Sarah had been cheating for months while I'd been trying to save our marriage. She'd been lying to my face while her family had been mocking me behind my back. My father's response was the most disappointing. Instead of acknowledging how his own son had been treated, he tried to play peacemaker. He suggested we all sit down and talk things through like adults. He said families sometimes say things they don't mean, that the anniversary card was probably just poor judgment rather than malicious intent. I sent him a private message with a simple question. If someone had treated him the way his son had been treated, would he be advocating for forgiveness? I reminded him of every slight, every dismissive comment, every time he'd chosen Sarah's family over his own flesh and blood. I asked him when he'd stopped being my father and started being their ally. He never responded. Update 1. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Sarah's affair partner's wife found out. Apparently, she was also in the group chat because she was friends with one of Sarah's sisters. The domino effect was beautiful to watch from a distance. Sarah's family tried to control the narrative, but social media had already done its work. The anniversary post had been shared dozens of times, with people adding their own stories of family cruelty and public humiliation. It had become a symbol of something larger. The way some people treat their loved ones when they think there won't be consequences. Sarah moved in with her parents temporarily, claiming she needed space to think. But I knew the real reason. Her affair partner had ended things immediately when his wife found out, and Sarah had nowhere else to go. The hotel receipts I'd shared showed they'd been splitting the costs, so it wasn't like he'd been supporting her financially. I filed for divorce the following Monday. My lawyer was impressed with the documentation I provided. Apparently, adultery cases are usually much harder to prove. The private investigator's report would make the proceedings straightforward, especially since we had a prenuptial agreement that included infidelity clauses. Sarah's family started reaching out individually, trying to convince me to reconsider. Her father called to apologize for the anniversary dinner, claiming they'd all had too much to drink and weren't thinking clearly. I reminded him that we'd been at a diner at 6 in the evening and nobody had ordered alcohol. Her mother sent a long text message about how families sometimes hurt each other, but love conquers all. She said Sarah was going through a difficult time and needed support, not judgment. I replied with a screenshot of the anniversary card and asked if this was her idea of family love. The sisters tried a different approach, claiming they'd never liked me anyway and were glad Sarah was finally free to find someone better. I thanked them for their honesty and said it was refreshing to finally hear what they really thought instead of pretending we were all one big happy family. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. Sarah's coworker, the one she'd been having the affair with, reached out to apologize. He said he'd had no idea I existed for the first few months of their relationship. Sarah had told him she was separated and in the process of getting divorced. When he'd started asking questions about why the divorce was taking so long, she'd made up stories about me being difficult and refusing to sign papers. He'd only learned the truth when his wife confronted him with the evidence from the group chat. Apparently, Sarah had been living a complete double life, telling him one story while telling me another. She'd been planning to leave me eventually, but wanted to make sure her financial situation was secure first. The conversation with him was oddly therapeutic. We were both victims of Sarah's deception, both manipulated and lied to. He was losing his marriage too, and while I felt bad for his wife, I couldn't help but appreciate the poetic justice of it all. Update 2. 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Sarah's family was in full crisis mode. The social media post had gone viral in our local community, and people were starting to recognize them in public. Sarah's mother, who worked in customer service at a local bank, was getting comments from customers who'd seen the post. Her father's small business was getting negative reviews from people who thought his treatment of his son-in-law reflected his character. Sarah herself was struggling to find a new place to live. The affair partner's wife had made it clear that if Sarah contacted her husband again, she'd file harassment charges. Sarah's job at the marketing firm was becoming uncomfortable because several of her colleagues had seen the evidence of her affair with their coworker. But I wasn't done yet. I'd been going through our shared finances with my lawyer, and we'd discovered some interesting discrepancies. Sarah had been moving money from our joint savings account into a personal account I didn't know about. Small amounts at first, but it had accelerated in recent months. The total was just over $15,000. More interesting was what she'd been spending the money on. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts for her affair partner, even a weekend trip to a resort that she'd told me was a work conference. She'd been funding her double life with our shared savings, money we'd been putting aside for a down payment on a house. My lawyer advised me that this would strengthen our case significantly. Not only had Sarah committed adultery, but she'd also been stealing marital assets to support her affair. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed included clauses about financial infidelity as well as physical infidelity. I decided to share this information the same way I'd shared everything else, through the group chat that had become the family's primary source of drama. I posted the bank statements and transaction records, along with receipts showing what the money had been spent on. The response was immediate and explosive. Sarah's family tried to defend her actions, claiming she'd been planning to pay the money back. Her mother suggested that maybe I'd been financially controlling and Sarah had needed access to funds for her own security. Her father accused me of violating Sarah's privacy by investigating her spending. But the evidence was too clear to dismiss. Sarah had been systematically stealing from our joint account to fund her affair, lying about work trips and conferences to cover her tracks. She'd even used our credit card to buy gifts for her lover, then claimed the charges were for work expenses. My father finally broke his silence, sending me a private message asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious to hear what he had to say after weeks of trying to play both sides. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where we'd gone when I was younger and needed advice about school or work. He looked older than I remembered, tired and worn down by the family drama that had consumed everyone's lives. He started by apologizing for laughing at the anniversary dinner. He said he'd been caught up in the moment and hadn't realized how cruel the joke was until he saw my reaction. He claimed he'd been trying to fit in with Sarah's family, to be accepted by them the way I never seemed to be. I asked him why my acceptance by his son's in-laws was more important than supporting his own child. He didn't have a good answer for that. Then he surprised me by admitting he'd never liked Sarah's family. He said they'd always treated me poorly, and he'd noticed it, but never said anything because he didn't want to cause problems in my marriage. He'd hoped that over time, they'd come to appreciate me the way he did. I told him that his silence had been interpreted as approval. When he'd laughed along with their jokes and participated in their dismissive behavior, he'd been telling them it was acceptable to treat his son that way. His desire to keep the peace had actually made the situation worse. We talked for over 2 hours, and by the end, I think he finally understood the depth of the damage that had been done. Not just by Sarah's affair or her family's cruelty, but by his own failure to stand up for his son when it mattered most. He asked what he could do to make things right. I told him it was too late for that, but if he wanted to rebuild our relationship, he needed to stop trying to fix things between me and Sarah's family. I needed him to choose a side, and that side needed to be his son's. Update 3. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once all the evidence was presented. Sarah's lawyer advised her to accept the settlement offer rather than fight it in court, where the details of her affair and financial infidelity would become public record. She would keep her car and personal belongings, but I would retain the house, the majority of our savings, and my retirement accounts. She would also be responsible for paying back the money she'd stolen from our joint account, with interest. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed included a clause about spousal support in cases of adultery. Since Sarah had been unfaithful and had stolen marital assets, she wouldn't be entitled to any ongoing financial support from me. Sarah's family made one last attempt to change my mind. They showed up at my house unannounced, claiming they wanted to apologize and make things right. Sarah's mother brought a homemade cake and acted like we were just having a normal family visit. I let them in because I was curious to see what their final play would be. They sat in my living room, the same living room where we'd celebrated holidays and birthdays, where I'd tried so hard to make them feel welcome over the years, and proceeded to gaslight me one more time. They claimed the anniversary dinner had been a misunderstanding. They said the card was meant to be motivational, not cruel. They suggested that maybe I'd been too sensitive, that I'd misinterpreted their intentions. Sarah's father even had the audacity to say that maybe this whole situation could bring our families closer together. I listened to their entire performance without saying a word. When they finished, I thanked them for coming and asked them to leave. Sarah's mother asked if that was it, if I wasn't going to respond to their apology. I told them that their apology wasn't for me. It was for them. They were trying to assuage their own guilt and restore their reputation in the community. A real apology would have come months or years ago, when their behavior first became cruel and dismissive. I explained that I'd spent years trying to earn their respect and acceptance, changing myself to fit their expectations, swallowing my pride to keep the peace. But I'd finally realized that some people don't want to respect you. They want to feel superior to you. My pain had been their entertainment, and my humiliation had been their bonding experience. They left without another word, and I haven't heard from them since. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Sarah moved to another city, claiming she needed a fresh start away from all the drama. Her affair partner's marriage didn't survive either. His wife filed for divorce shortly after everything came to light. My father and I have been slowly rebuilding our relationship. He's made an effort to understand how his actions affected me, and he stopped trying to play peacemaker with people who were never interested in peace. It's not perfect, but it's progress. The anniversary card is framed on my desk at work now, not as a reminder of the pain, but as a reminder of the moment I finally found my backbone. Colleagues sometimes ask about it, and I tell them it's a memento from the day I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who hurt you the most. I've started dating again, slowly and carefully. I'm in no rush to remarry, but I've learned to recognize the signs of people who genuinely care about me versus those who see me as a convenient target for their own issues. The group chat still exists, though I left it months ago. My father tells me it's mostly quiet now, with occasional updates about family events I'm no longer invited to. I don't miss it. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah's family learned anything from this experience. I doubt it. People like that rarely change. They just find new targets for their cruelty. But that's not my problem anymore. I'm building a new life now, surrounded by people who actually celebrate my successes instead of mocking them. People who would never think to humiliate me on my anniversary and then laugh about it. People who understand that love isn't supposed to hurt. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't elaborate schemes or public humiliation. It's simply refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. It's walking away from people who don't deserve access to your life. It's choosing yourself when everyone else has made it clear they won't. 5 days after that anniversary dinner, they were panicking in the group chat because they finally realized there would be consequences for their actions. But by then, I was already gone, building something better without them. And that's exactly where I plan to stay.